Yes, hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. I'm Till Bruckner from Concilium Scientific's Transparamed campaign. I've been working in the area for clinical trial transparency for about 7 years. And when I started off in this field, it was intensely depressing what you saw coming out in terms of research, because there was one paper after the other saying, oh, there's a problem, and then they'd quantify the problem in some way, but they wouldn't tell you with which institutions exactly the problem was. They couldn't tell you who was responsible for the problem. And then in the conclusion, they'd write that, well, we've got a problem and it could be solved if everyone just did things better in future. It was really not constructive. And over the past few years, we've seen a massive sea change in that. So I'd like to welcome our panel today, and they've all been part of that change. And they'll be presenting on the work that they're doing in sort of four broad areas. First of all, is the sort of dynamics, what actually drives clinical trial reporting at institutions. The second one is new approaches, new tools to research and advocacy on this. The third one is country strategies, what people are doing in different countries around the world to promote clinical trial transparency. And then at the end, we're going to have a discussion, and that is going to be moderated by Emma Thompson from Cochrane. So that's it from me, and over to you, Tony Keys.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me. My name is Anthony Keys. I work at Johns Hopkins University in this clinical trials .gov space. And I also represent the Clinical Trials Registration and Results Reporting Task Force, which is a consortium made up of over 200 U.S. academic institutions and over 600 members who are collectively working to gain some grounds here. We represent the academic side. So one of the most important parts of my job is helping individual academic centers meet their clinicaltrials.gov reporting requirements. We find a lot of people want to do that, but have some trouble understanding the regulations. So we pool our resources collectively and work towards developing best practices so everybody can be more compliant with registration and results reporting. Okay, next.
Daniel Stray.
Okay, I thought because I thought another presentation comes up. Hi, Daniel Strech. I am affiliated at in Berlin, where I am co-directing the Quest Center for Responsible Research. You will hear a little bit about projects and products we work on later from Delvin Franzen and Maya Hill. And I was invited to comment briefly on a certain first and second class transparency as we perceive it a little bit increasingly, at least here in Germany. I thought I can show you maybe a slide just to illustrate this. Do you see my slide?
Yes.
Yes. So the point is, and now it starts here, that we saw a heavy increase in transparency, so to say, for clinical trials over the past 5 years. And this is a narrative that you hear in Germany from many stakeholders. And it's true, but it's true only for drug trials sponsored by university medical centers that were registered as European registry. And they improved heavily in summary results reporting, which they are required to do by law. They didn't do it for many years. 5 years ago, there were below 5% of trials that reported summary results. With some pressure over the past 5 years, long story short, they improved heavily. We now have universities such as Charité here in Berlin that has a summary results reporting rate of over 95%. So it's really a heavy increase in, let's say, clinical trial transparency. But it's only for this subgroup. If you go to clinicaltrials.gov, search trials from German university medical centers, and check for how often they report summary results, so including device trials, psychotherapy, surgery, and all the other non-drug trials, there is no increase. It's still below 5%. It's the same with manuscript publications. If you search for how many of them did maybe not report summary results in a registry, but how many published their results at all via a manuscript, for example, We have, of course, a higher publication rate, which is between 40 and 50%, but you don't see an improvement there. So it really stays at this level. What increased is only this drug trial specific point of summary results reporting. And this is why I would argue that we increasingly, at least over the past 5 years, see that 3 important stakeholders, the regulators in Germany, but also the academic institutions and also funders, take very seriously the transparency of drug trials. And here, with regard to transparency, summary results reporting. But for both perspectives, the clinical studies as one perspective, there are, of course, much more clinical studies that we should care about, not only drug trials. And with regard to transparency, I also see a certain first and second class aspect going on. First class transparency, so to say, is the dimension of summary results reporting. But transparency is much more than just summary results reporting. Publication of manuscripts and having them open access and so on are all very important dimensions of transparency. So this is my input. I don't have directly a solution, but I think this was the idea here to bring into discussion this danger, so to say, of first and second class transparency for both clinical studies and the different types of transparency. Thank you.
Gustav?
Hi, I'm Gustav Nilsson. I'm an associate professor at the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm, Sweden. And together with Catherine Axfors, who is not here today, I'm co-leading a project to follow up the reporting of clinical trials in the Nordic countries. We are strongly inspired by the work done by Daniel and his group. And I'm also happy that several other collaborators on this project are on the call today. I won't mention everyone in the interest of time. So what we are doing is to follow up trials registered in the EU Clinical Trials Registry and the clinicaltrials.gov registry, and that are marked as completed. And we're looking for results in the registries as well as in the published literature, with the help of a large number of volunteers who are searching and coding studies. Now, I agree with what Till said in the beginning. What we are doing now is rather descriptive, and whatever the results are going to be, we are probably going to conclude that they could be much better. For that reason, we are talking to stakeholders at an early stage. We will soon have results, but I've already started conversations with the major stakeholders in Sweden, research funders, the Health Technology Assessment Agency, the Ethics Review Agency, the drugs regulator, and some of the medical universities. And so far, everyone is quite enthusiastic about the data that we're going to deliver, and understandably, many of the stakeholders don't want to take on extra work unless they get a new mandate and perhaps some funding to go with it. So basically, we are starting a conversation between stakeholders, initially in Sweden, later on also in the other Nordic countries. And I'm hoping that that will lead to some way to find an improved institutional responsibility and support to researchers. Thank you. And with that, I'll hand over to Claire.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm Claire Verriard. I'm the program manager for the ISRCTN registry. And today, yeah, I thought I'd take a bit of an opportunity to throw out some ideas. So I've been looking into research on things like household recycling, where you can see that there's a similar you know, there isn't really a kind of immediate tangible benefit to the individual, but there is, you know, there is a community benefit perhaps in the future. So, you know, trying to change people's behavior means interacting with quite, you know, subconscious processes of cost benefit analysis that are going on in people's brains and going on in animals' brains. So it's a really deep thing. So I think we need to think about that. And, you know, I would like to add, make it worth it to the HRA's make it public transparency slogans. So just going back to those slogans, the first one is make it easy. So actually, for people to do things, it has to be easier than not doing it. So that's kind of difficult where you're expecting them to kind of do a lot of work. So, you know, maybe what we could think about here is kind of, can we outsource and professionalize the actual transparency activities, you know, and make people, you know, so that there would be experts in doing that, and that would free up the researchers to do what they're best at. And the other thing, obviously, is technology. So, you know, could AI create summary results based on published results? Or, you know, could we be have an app where all the individual data is stored and then can be shared by the app? As for making transparency the norm, currently the norm is actually quite a low bar, and you know, that can help to normalize and justify bad behavior. So, you know, we can already point to a lot of research showing that people aren't doing what they should be doing. We need some good news stories, you know, where there has been impact from people sharing data or reporting what they think are inconclusive results. The other thing here is to kind of try to reduce people's tolerance of their own waste. You know, it needs to be actually disgusting to people that there is waste out there that they've created. So in terms of the worth the effort, you know, there needs to be a kind of timely personal benefit, not the vague promise of future benefit to others. That doesn't really trigger the behavior that we want in people. So, you know, things like summary results really should have a separate citation that people can use as an output. Or, you know, could funders withhold some of the funding until the study's reported and then release it? Could investigators pay a deposit and then they get that back when they report? You know, I'm thinking about things like a very successful bottle recycling in Germany, where, you know, even if people themselves aren't recycling, there are people who can make an income from that. So there's a kind of incentive to do it. So I'm hoping to hear about your ideas about how to incentivize people, because we really need to make it worthwhile on a very sort of deep subconscious level. Thank you.
Delma?
Okay. Thank you. So, hi everyone, very happy to be here today. I'm presenting also together with my colleague Maya, and we're both based at the Quest Center for Responsible Research, just like Daniel, who presented a little while ago. So we are going to tell you a little bit about some of our work to drive clinical trial transparency. And so we used very similar methods to what Gustav presented, so we're not going to go into detail, but essentially we wanted to build first a status quo analysis of how trials that were conducted at German university medical centers were doing on several registration and reporting practices. And then we wanted to make that data set useful to drive change. And so we piloted 2 different communication and change strategies. And the first one I'm going to talk to you about is an institutional dashboard. And the motivation here was really to try and take that status quo analysis and communicate it in a clear way to leadership at university medical centers to help them support improvement. So it's really difficult to change if you don't have a clear idea of how you're currently doing. And so this is a screenshot of what this dashboard looks like. It's recently been published. And as you can see, it just gives university medical centers a quick overview of how they're doing on different registration and reporting practices. And this also includes the timely reporting, both for summary results in the registry, but also as a journal publication. And specifically, this work on tracking trial results as journal publication involved quite a lot of manual work. And this is maybe something to keep in mind when that is a bit different also to other trial trackers that are out there. So how did we use this dashboard to drive change? So of course, we wanted this was a paper, so this reached the relevant academic community, but we wanted to go beyond that, and we had two main target audiences. One was to really raise awareness of this issue among the general public, and so together with amazing support from Till and others, we got a lot of attention from some media outlets in Germany, and that was really, really helpful, I think, in bringing this topic to the fore. And second, we really just wanted to build some really concrete tools that could directly support university medical centers to improve. And with that, we're actually engaging also with the relevant community here in Germany. So, for example, the Association of Medical Faculties, we're planning a workshop with them to discuss the dashboard and how to move forward from there. So all in all, we really think this has been very helpful in getting the conversation started and to move into implementation. And with that, I'm passing on to Maya, who's going to tell you a bit more about our second communication strategy.
Thank you. Yeah, so alongside this dashboard that gives you summary statistics about an institution, we wanted to make sure to engage with the individual trialist stakeholder because they're in a prime position to make sure that they're fulfilling transparency requirements. But they don't always know how their exact trial is doing, what the laws are, what the guidelines are, and what they can quickly do. I think Claire touched on that point. How do we make this easy for people? And so we designed a report card in discussion with several of the people on the call today to get this information in front of the trialists in as compact and clear a way as possible. So we have a simple tabular format that shows the practice, whether the trial is doing it, some details about the trial, and crucially, what can be done. And this is hyperlinks to generalist resources about the registry, or even institutional specific resources. So I'll just quickly show you one example, which is for summary results reporting in the registry. This trial, for example, did not do that, but still can. And here's a hyperlink on how to do that. So we have a tool, but again, that's only the next step from data set to tool. We want to make sure that this is actually helpful. We are just wrapping up a feasibility study where we disseminated this at the Charité to over 100 trialists. We got pretty positive feedback on a survey. There was interest in this tool. There was also some struggles with the bureaucracy around this. Again, Claire, you brought that up. How do we make this easier for folks? And we're now looking at whether this actually drove change. We're not seeing huge amounts of change, but we did see an increase in the number of publications that have been linked in the registry. So we're hoping that maybe we can maybe identify some practices that will be a step towards transparency. And that brings us to our next step in driving change for both the dashboard and the trial transparency report cards, which is we want to make sure we're engaging the stakeholders in how we develop these tools and how we share these tools. So we're moving into a more qualitative phase now that we have these prototypes that are going to involve interviews and co-creation workshops. And I think with that, we're passing off to the next person, who is, sorry, I'm pulling up the name.
Elise.
Elise, thank you.
That's okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Elise Gamert. I'm a former clinical trials nurse in the US. I am in London for my master's in health policy, and I've been working with Till and Consilium for almost a year on assessing the trial policies of the 14 largest public and philanthropic funders in the US. So the impact that this had was pretty mixed. It depended on the funder. Kind of unsurprisingly, a lot of our large public funders didn't give any response. Some of our philanthropic funders were pretty receptive and quick to act. Just to name a couple, the Alzheimer's Association immediately modified their language to remove some ambiguity in their policy documents. The American Heart Association is forming an advisory group for when they start to scale up their clinical trials. The Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation added some documents that were previously private to a public part of their website to increase transparency. I think that the two takeaways from doing this was that benchmarking was very helpful for the funders to compare themselves and see how well they're doing. I think that maybe injecting a little bit of competition is motivating for them. And then echoing what Delwyn and Maya were saying, working with a journalist and helping to get this outside of the academic world and into the public, especially since all of this money is coming from public funds, is hugely helpful. And on to Nick DeVito.
All righty, sharing my screen. People see the trials tracker? Yeah. So yeah, I'm Nick DeVito. I'm a postdoc at University of Oxford. I work at the Bennett Institute for Applied Data Science under Ben Goldacre as my supervisor. I run the Trials Tracker project, which for anyone who doesn't know, is these live automated trackers that track compliance with US, and this is the EU one for EU laws around trial reporting. And the reason we created these was a couple-fold. Basically, you have these laws, but there was no way anyone knew if anyone was following the laws. And the people who made the laws and were implementing the laws had no interest seemingly in showing who was following the law and who was and wasn't following the law. So we thought that we could make a good run at it based on developments in both the US and the EU and how data was made available and had the clarity around the laws and the rules governing trials being reported. So we created these, we've published about it. You can read more details there, go find publications and check those out if you're interested. But it wasn't only sort of this accountability, this what some people like to dismiss as like a naming and shaming thing, but we really view these also as like a key resource for people like Tony Keyes, who spoke earlier. You know, if you're sort of managing a clinical trial portfolio and maybe this wasn't as on your radar as it could have been, or you're not as resourced to have the vision over your portfolio as much as you could, right? You're that person for the University of Missouri Columbia. You can click on that and you can just get a view of all your clinical trials and their current status that you have sponsored on clinicaltrials.gov when they're coming to up to due, what to do, things like that. And the impact this has had has really been positive. You know, I've heard a lot of positive feedback from people in the clinical trial management community that they've used these trackers for those purposes. And then also has brought attention to the issue. So here in the UK, we had a parliamentary committee give a lot of attention to sort of what was going on here with the trackers and the performance of UK public institutions. And I wasn't going to show a slide, but I happen to have one ready that I just wanted to show real quick, which is from when we first started collecting data for the EU Trials Tracker. This is every major non-commercial sponsor of trials in the UK. And through today, you can see just massive improvements due to the attention that the parliamentary committee gave to this and sort of gave everyone a kick to get this going. But I will add, and to build on sort of what Daniel was speaking on earlier, if I'm going to talk about some limitations of the Trials Tracker, right, we're looking very narrowly at compliance with the laws, and only certain trials are covered with the law by the laws. And both the EU is even more restrictive. It's just medicines. In the US, you'll have medicines and devices and a few other things. But there's lots that isn't covered, and also I'm looking only in these trackers at results appearing on registries, which is only one form of dissemination. Obviously, there's lots of other ways to disseminate. This one just happens to be the one that's required by law. So it's very easy to track and very easy metrics to use. But you know, people like Gustav or the Into Value project that people over in Quest have worked on are doing the manual work of trying to find what this rate looks like in the broader literature. I think that's where I'm going to end it for my section. And we're going to move over to the, I believe, the country section next. Let me stop sharing my screen. And we're going to talk about the US first, I think.
Megan, that's you ready to go?
Yes. Thanks, Nick. So I'm from a health justice organization called Universities Allied for Essential Medicines. We work internationally, and I work within the North American Leadership Division. we work principally with universities to ensure that there's affordable and equitable access to medicine developed there and also within the broader international field. So I am a student at UC Berkeley, calling in from California. So hello, everyone. So thank you, Nick, for talking about Trials Tracker. It has been a wonderful resource for us and our campaign. So for anyone who's unfamiliar with US law, FDAW is the FDA Amendments Act from 2007. This law essentially required clinical trial sponsors to report results to clinicaltrials.gov. And as a result of that law, there's also ways to ensure enforcement from the FDA for clinical trial sponsors. So one way is through sending preliminary notices to those who are non-compliant with results reporting. While there's over 4,000 trials that are not compliant with the law, only 92 have received preliminary notices of non-compliance. And this notice essentially says, please become compliant within this set of time. If they are not compliant within that amount of time, then they send a notice of non-compliance, which is 30 days in which they must submit results. Otherwise, the government can levy fines. So all of this has been incredibly successful at increasing compliance. It's just that this scope of enforcement has been pretty limited. And so far, the government has never levied any fines because this has been so successful in ensuring compliance. So we released a report in 2021 of the top 40 universities in the US who were not compliant with clinical trial results reporting. And after our report, we saw that there was an increase of rates of above 80% from March 2019 to February 2021. And the total number of research institutions that were legally compliant with the law increased from 13 to 17. We've also worked congressionally with Senator Frank Pallone to help him write a letter to the FDA and NIH to ensure compliance of clinical trial results reporting law. And most recently, we have been working on a citizen petition to the FDA with Columbia Law School's Science, Health, and Information Clinic. So this citizen petition is asking the FDA to increase its enforcement of the law to a minimum of 250 pre-notices per year. And this is within the scope of over 4,000 trials being non-compliant. At the same time, we'd like them to publicize a pre-notice public dashboard. While notices of non-compliance are public, there's only been 4, the pre-notice number is not available to the public. At the same time, we'd also like them to issue guidance about prioritization for trials that pose the greatest risk to human life, because their guidance regarding where they enforce particular clinical trials that are non-compliant has been very unfocused. So the FDA must respond to this petition by August. So we'll let you know how things pan out. At the same time, we've been working on congressional actions. We've been meeting with different House of Representative offices, inquiring about increasing awareness for this issue and also potentially writing letters in support. We've had other organizations comment on our petition docket, so anyone can submit comments until the FDA responds. And that is our campaign. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, I think I'm next. Jörg Meerpohl, Director of Cochrane Germany and heading the Institute for Evidence in Medicine at Freiburg University. Obviously, for Cochrane, both the international organization, but also on the national level, access to data of clinical trials, or also public health trials, is super important because it's really the basis of what we do on in our daily routine. We need access to trial results, but also to information on trial methods. Hence, Cochrane and also Cochrane Germany has quite a long history in work on the field of access to data. So that includes empirical work on just describing the problem as we've heard, and there's a long track record, in particular of colleagues at Cochrane internationally. We have been involved in methods development, such as reporting guidelines to just improve the transparency of reporting on clinical trials, but also some advocacy and structural work. So for example, in Germany, advocacy work over many years led to the setup of the German Register for Clinical Trials by my predecessor, Gerd Antes. More recently, we've also been involved in some methods work on looking at publication bias and dissemination bias and qualitative research, which has informed the guidance of the CERQUAL tool. And just lately, we are trying to set up a coalition of partners in Germany with Daniel and his team, but also other groups like the German Network of Evidence-Based Healthcare and the National HTA organization and others, reaching out with that coalition to important partners to raise awareness, as we've heard before, to the issue of non-reporting and lack of transparency in research. So that includes contact with our umbrella organization of ethic boards in Germany, with our national regulator, trying to address that second tier that Daniel nicely alluded to, that isn't being covered as of now by national legislation. So we really hope that we'll try to improve also on that end, access to trial data and improve the reporting. And with that, I'm happy to hand over to Matthias from Switzerland.
Yeah, my name is Matthias Briel. I'm heading a meta research center here at the University of Basel in Switzerland. And in Switzerland, prospective registration of clinical trials is mandatory by law, but not the publication of any kind of results. So this is just recommended. So we are monitoring the registration and publication of clinical trials for several years on a national level, but also on a local level. So just around Basel, it's basically the western part of Switzerland. And here we see that since it became legally binding that you have to register your trial, the registration rates actually increased. So for industry-sponsored trials, it is really at a high level, close to 100%. For investigator-sponsored trials, it is now about 90%. So there are still about 10% clinical trials not registered at all, and about 70% are only prospectively registered. So we also did some qualitative work and asked in a survey, but also directly approached colleagues who did not register their trial, why they did not register, and they mostly replied, so more than half said that they were actually not aware of that law, and nobody really reminded them that it is mandatory by law. A second point was then they just said that they did not have the time and the resources to do the registration. And finally, a group of about 40% said that they would need further information or instructions or further help and support. So this made us reach out to various stakeholders that could firstly provide the support. So clinical trial units in Switzerland start setting up now registration support for clinical researchers, and this seems to be appreciated. So there are quite a lot of clinical research colleagues approaching now, CTU colleagues, to have their trial registered, and this includes even then regular updates of the trial on the registry, so on a yearly basis. Secondly, we thought, okay, the researchers need to be reminded and also informed that this is actually mandatory, and the ethics committees are happy to do this now in a systematic way, but they are still reluctant to really enforce the law. So they restrain from any penalties. Equally, the university hospitals or the universities do not think that it is relevant that they really assume any responsibility here, and do not want to enforce any registration or results publication for the trials that are run at their institutions. So we keep working together with the different stakeholders in Switzerland, the funding agency, the main public funder in Switzerland, is very much interested in increasing the transparency, and also because the law has been changed in Switzerland only about 6 years ago, and it's possible then to further revise some aspects there, and we push that the publication of, or the availability of results from all clinical trials is also made mandatory by law. So with this, I pass on to Dinesh.
Yeah. So hopefully you can hear me. My name is Dinesh Thakur. I'm a public health activist, primarily focused on drug development and pharmaceutical regulation in India. Hearing all of you, it just feels like, we are back in dark ages, because India, although it does have what's called a clinical trial registry of India, there are serious issues with it, in the sense that the first step in order to sort of encourage transparency is to actually have a system in place. Until 2007, there was no mandate for the country to try and collect this information and disseminate it. India started running the clinical trial registry of India through an amendment to a statute. It's not in the law, but it's a delegated statute, so enforcement is an issue. But the kind of work that gets done in India broadly falls within two categories. First is that studies that are done to develop modern medicine, whether they are IND-directed studies or NDA-directed studies, or clinical studies for bioequivalence, which India has a very large generic drug industry that this industry conducts. And the second is the clinical studies of indigenous medicine, which is traditional Indian medicine. There are several arms of that: Ayurveda, Unani, Siddha, and all of that. And in both cases, the quality of information and the completeness of information is highly suspect. So last couple of years, we've been trying to collect information to at least baseline where we stand in order to make a case for additional transparency. And I can share some information with you. I don't have any slides, but I can share some information with you as to what we have now been able to collect information about. What this tells us is that there is a significant need, given the fact that India supplies a vast majority of generic drug medicine, generic drugs to both Europe and the United States. And although these companies that are seeking market authorization within Europe and in India require disclosure of these studies and approvals prior to the respective regulators in these countries, and that doesn't necessarily often happen. We did a study looking an empirical study basically between 2007 and November of 2021. And there were about 37,000, the exact number is 37,389 studies that were registered in the Indian Clinical Trial Registry. And when we looked at, when we started looking at this data that was available there, the Indian registry had a very large number of single-center trials compared to what we see in the clinicaltrials.gov's number. So clinicaltrials.gov has 28%, Indian equivalent has 84%, for example. out of these 37,000 studies that were registered, that had 79,000 clinical trial sites and principal investigators. And if you start looking at some of this data, just to kind of share something with you, 26 principal investigators were registered with more than 45 trial sites across 15 years, which is a highly suspect number, that tells you about the quality of data that's in there. Average industry funding across PIs was about 82.5%, which is very high compared to clinicaltrials.gov. So all I'm telling you this data is because the information that is put in the CTRI is highly suspect. I think it's more of a checkbox exercise that pharmaceutical companies and institutions do to try and meet some form-filling exercise, and the quality of information that is in the CTRI is highly suspect. Now, just to give you a sense of the indigenous traditional medicine studies, in the same time period, when we looked at between 2007 and 2021, we had 27,000 interventional studies for Ayurvedic products. And if you started looking at this, a large proportion of these were single-arm studies, about 1/4 of them. And which is, again, it's a highly suspect number. And, we only had about 20% of these studies were blinded compared to, a very high number, like 65% of modern medicine studies. So the reason I'm sharing this information with you is because we've never had a baseline information for the quality of clinical studies that are being done in India, both by large pharma as a part of the global studies and also Indian generic companies for market authorization in countries like Germany, United Kingdom, United States. There's a system available, but the quality of information is highly suspect. So with this baseline, we are hoping to undertake more advocacy efforts to try and clean up the system, make it compatible, and bring it up to standards with clinicaltrials.gov. So I'll stop there.
Florian?
Okay, Amir, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Hello, so I'm Florian Audet. I come from France, and I come from the west of France, from Brittany, and actually it's the west of Europe, and actually it's a wild, wild west of clinical trial reporting. So I need to speak about France and what happened in France. So first of all, I don't have any conflict of interest with pharmaceutical firms. I have some fundings with those bodies. They say, oh no, he's going to talk about all those bodies who are funding him. But in fact, it's very important because those are the usual suspects, those who can do something actually in France. And I will introduce you the French landscape. So first we have in France a ministry for research, and we have another ministry for health. Ministry of Research actually is pushing a lot in favor of open science. So you have this initiative, which is part of the French national open science policy. So we have a big open science policy in France, and we have a French committee that strongly supports this policy. So actually, there is a political wish to make things transparent in France. But actually, this is from the Ministry of Research. And we also, so they have done this kind of thing. So we have also in France, like a trial tracker thing, or like the initiative by Gustav and Catherine. We have this kind of dashboard to measure openness and result reporting in a database. So you can see, so industrial sponsor, we are around 70% of industrial lead sponsor in France that report their results. And for academic lead sponsor, it's 29%. That's why I say it was the wild, wild west, because this number is quite low. Actually, this number is, there are perhaps some false negative in that, because the problems can be also that people do not report the clinical trial number of registration in their publication, so the link cannot be made automatically. So perhaps there are a little bit more publications that are not captured by this kind of thing. So the Ministry of Research helps a lot, actually, and helps to monitor things. But the Ministry of Research does not give funding to clinical research that much. The funders are the French National Agency for Research, but they don't really give funds to the big clinical trials. The body that gives a lot of funding to the clinical trials is the Ministry of Health. So it's not a Ministry of Research, but Ministry of Health. They give 130 million euros for clinical research. And they don't have a specific policy, for instance, for data sharing. They don't really care. When we want to talk with them, it's very difficult. For result reporting, they have a kind of policy because they give to the hospital 10% of the total budget if the hospital reports the trial in a way or in another way. So there is some kind of incentives, but apparently it's not sufficient for the hospital to move forward. We have also in France two bodies. So we have ANSM, which is Agence Nationale des Produits de Santé, which is a regulatory body, and HES, which is Health Technology Assessment Body. So for ANSM, they oversee clinical research, and then they can enforce penalties for not complying with the law. But I'm not sure that the agency answered TranspareMed's email, so we'll see this will till, but I don't think that they are very responsive, while they could be very helpful in this. And for the HAS, they cannot enforce anything for clinical trial reporting. So perhaps it's easier for them to express their interest in open science. And they did this. We were involved in this recent position of the national agency, and they call in favor in transparency through registered report publication, data and clinical trial report sharing. So there are some support and some initiatives that can help to support, but actually it's not sufficient. The INSERM, which is the big institute for research, has also now an initiative. I am part of this initiative, and we are going to try to push for transparency at the institutional level. But INSERM is not the leader in clinical trials, it's rather medical hospitals who are doing those clinical trials. And part of Laurier, we are going to partner with Osiris, an European project. So Nick, for instance, who is here, is also involved in that. And we are going to try to see if we can increase reproducibility through initiative of transparency. So we are discussing a lot about that. And I must say that this is broader than only clinical trial and clinical research. Thank you.
Thank you, Florian, and thank you everyone who's spoken so far. What a great list of panelists we've had, from the wild west of the French coast to the west coast of the US to India. So thank you all for your thoughts and for kicking this off. We now have about 40 minutes, 40, to have a bit of a discussion. So we have the chat function. I've seen that a lot of people have shared links and various resources. Thank you for that. But also feel free to use that to put questions and prompts. And I'd like to invite people that are kind of not in the panel, people in the audience, to also put their cameras on and be part of the conversation if they wish to. So after hearing all those fantastic introductions to the work that's being done, there's definitely a lot of themes going on that I think we can pick into. There's a great deal of work on quantifying the issue through dashboards, through accountability and trackers, and also raising awareness of that this is an issue through those tools, and then the political level advocacy, but also thinking about the barriers and facilitators of reporting among researchers. We've heard some of that. It'd be great to go into that again later on. But also I take Daniel's very good point that we need to go beyond what we currently are doing in terms of, what might be within the legal frameworks or the things that are kind of more easy to enforce, but seeing transparency as a broader issue that's more complicated than just getting drug trials up in 12 months or whatever. So with that, I would like to kick off. Maybe I will start with a question. If you had one thing that you would want to achieve in the next 5 years in this area, what would it be? Anyone feel free to start and let's have some discussions. Maybe that was too big a question.
Can I suggest?
Yes, go on, Gustav.
So the most immediate objective that we're trying to advocate for is to have someone, possibly the ethics review agency, but someone should have the job of following up the reporting of clinical trials, so that it doesn't have to be run on a shoestring as a research project, which we're doing now. And then since I'm already talking, I'll usurp the question a bit and suggest that once we've achieved that, the next goal that I would personally like to see would be to mobilize resources so that we can go back into the archives and dig out results for old trials that are probably sitting on shelves here and there in our universities with researchers that have moved on to other things or other places, but where the results could still be salvaged with an effort of time and money.
Yes, speaking on behalf of Cochrane, I would say that would be very excellent for improving the work that we do, and I'm sure many would appreciate that. Going to the point about having people that are responsible specifically for this, I'd be interested to hear from people in different contexts about how that works in places outside of Sweden. Is there anywhere where there is really a dedicated resource, or is this still all just overworked people with a very small budget? Feel free to chip in if anyone has a different system than the one I just outlined. Daniel, were you going to say something?
In a certain way, can I ask Till to respond to this with regard to what is currently going on in Great Britain? I mean, if I understand rightly, then you haven't introduced this Make It Public initiative here, right? This is, of course, what we in Germany, maybe not 5 years, but I would at least hope that within 1 year, we might have a first response from both groups, both important stakeholder groups, the ethics committees in Germany, we have 53 of them, but also the regulator, the more legal regulator in this regard, that they will give us feedback whether they are willing in principle to copy a little bit of what just recently happened in Great Britain with the Make It Public initiative. Because if I understand right, then you have it in a certain way. And my interest would be to know, when will we see first results of what is currently going on in Great Britain? When we will see a database that is really listening all approved clinical trials and then showing that 12 months after study completion, there are really automatic reminders going on to the trial list asking for results reporting, not only drug trials. So can you say something on this?
I can see that Nick's raised his hand, and Claire, I think, is much closer to the process than I am, so I'll leave it to them to respond to that.
Yeah, so I'll just say first, here in the UK, so we've sort of even gotten, we very recently gotten some much better news, even beyond just the Make It Public campaign, which is sort of this idea that the HRA should be undertaking efforts to improve these sorts of things. And I mean, already we've seen the HRA doing these yearly, they sort of do these annual transparency audits and stuff, and they're promising to do more. We'll see more. We now, which Claire can definitely talk more about than I can, but the automatic registration is happening, slowly rolling out as a thing to ensure that everything that's happening in the UK sort of gets registered as a condition of ethics approval, which is supposed to already have happened to Emma's earlier point, but now it's like they're actually offering like a service to allow your stuff to get registered automatically, and you don't have to worry about it. And then lastly, the best news we've had is now make it public is just sort of like a campaign, like a guiding thing for the HRA to do. But we now have gotten news that the incoming clinical trial legislation, the sort of post-Brexit overhaul of the UK regulatory structure, is going to include requirements for prospective registration and results reporting within 12 months. And then I don't know if there's things built in. They sort of haven't talked about audit or reminders or things like that, but at the very least, there do appear to be sanctions on the table where if you don't report or if you fail to register, report prior trials, they may hold up or not approve your future trials until you come within compliance. So as always, this sounds great. We'll see how it looks in practice, because as we know, as was laid out in the US context and a little bit by me in the EU context, just having these things in law isn't always enough.
Absolutely. It's the enforcement in practice, right? Claire, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that at the moment, again, this is just for clinical trials of investigational drugs that are being automatically fed into ISRCTN, and also that this law will apply to. So, you know, we still have to get similar things in place for the non-CTIMPs.
Yeah, devices probably not included as well, right? Or
at the moment, combined drug and device trials are, yeah.
Oh, okay. Well,
but not drug alone. Drugs are sort of a Wild West.
Okay.
I mean, sorry, device. Device
yeah.
Sorry, device is a bit of a Wild West situation. Yeah.
Yeah, I was looking for a missing device trial early on, and yeah, the Wild West definitely applies. Florian, I'd like to come to you. You have your hand up.
Yes, so I had an idea that came in mind, but I think that we should think also about that, because each time a desirable outcome become a target, people start to game about it. And I had some experience. So I would say that in France, we don't have a lot of support to make the data public. So for instance, in my hospital, we are only starting to try to communicate trial results as they should be. And we have started to benchmark a little bit before by contacting hospitals in France and also in Germany who behaved very well on certain indicators. So it was very fun, because the hospital we contacted in France, we asked them why they were better than other hospitals. And actually, they said clearly that they were better because they had an audit because of very bad study, and then they were audited by the health authority, and the health authority just said, you know, it would be better if you would be better on this indicator. So they started to behave just because they had a lot of fear. But this does not happen for the other centers. So the other centers don't fear anything, so they don't do anything. And they started to behave like that because of that. And the health authority, NSM, asked them to be better on the European reporting system, but not on clinicaltrial.gov. So actually, they are very bad at clinicaltrial.gov and very good at the UCTR. So it's very interesting to look at that. And also, when we contacted another center, they said, so we had a lot of pressure to be good on this indicator. And in order to achieve this, we started to communicate about the results of the trial that were suspended, because it's very simple. You just have to write suspended, and then it's okay. It's considered as reported. But actually, we need, of course, to know that the trial was suspended. But what we need is the results of trial that are actually completed and have some results. And sometimes it was secondary, and it's quite more difficult. You need more resources and more things like that. That's why I say it's quite complex.
Certainly. Thanks for sharing those insights into those different conversations you've had, Florian. David, I'd like to come to you now. Welcome to the conversation. Could you give a quick introduction to yourself before you speak?
Me?
Yeah.
I'm a rather older physicist come statistician.
Brilliant. Well, it's glad to have you here.
Yes, I'm interested in devices, because I don't know much about this, but I have the impression that the NHS would welcome a lot of phone applications, which will probably not be much good for anything, but which will be sold at a great price to the NHS. Do you know what's happening? Can someone cast light on how these things are actually tested and reported on?
That is a great question. Does anyone have experience on that area? Imagine it's a bit of a minefield. Nick,
I have secondhand experience very briefly through a colleague of mine who, if she were here, she could answer this question much more detailed. But I think that the very broad hand-wavy answer to your question, David, is not much is going on there, and it's not done particularly well. And there's a big question over like whether these should be, used under the, like, should we be treating them as medical devices? Should we be holding them to that standard of evidence? Are they something different? Should they be using a different standard of evidence? I think that, yeah, and you have all these things, you have like these apps that do health things, whether they're for mental health awareness or like, menstruation tracking, things like that, that are used for these purposes, but they're not vetted. They make claims that are unsubstantiated. And the research backing those claims is usually insufficient. That's my go, but I don't know that anyone's done a full-scale systematic audit of the area, but it's something that someone probably should do, and people I know who have thought about doing.
And I see that Claire mentioned in the chat that there are some studies in the ISRCTM. Maybe this is another frontier to add to your list, Daniel. Sorry. Yeah, can I come to you now?
Yes, thanks. I just wanted to come back to your very initial question. What is kind of my personal priority for the next 5 years? And just wanted to come back again to that thought that we shouldn't just focus as a community on clinical trials of drugs or medical devices. I think, as we've seen with the COVID pandemic, there are so much interventions that are important for health and healthcare, non-pharmaceutical interventions, public health interventions. So we really need transparency on a much broader scale than just clinical trial development. And that also implies, from my point of view, and that's another important issue I think to consider, not just the results or results reporting, it's really also the methods of the trials, information, how they were conducted, statistical analysis plans, and so on and so forth. Because otherwise, we might have the results eventually, but we can't interpret them, and that's not going to help us for decision making, and that's what the ultimate goal is. So that is just a plea to the community from my end.
Very, very good points. Thanks, Dirk. Delvin and Maya.
Yes, I want to piggyback on what you were saying, Jorg, about the importance to look beyond simple results reporting into methods, and highlight also the importance of registry data quality, which, thank you, we heard a lot about CTRI from Dinesh and the struggles there, but work that Nick and I are wrapping up on COVID trials just really show us how poor registry data quality makes it hard to evaluate the rest of our questions. I mean, it's hard to know if a trial reported on time if we don't know whether it was suspended, terminated, completed, ongoing, or we don't know when it was completed. And so I also think we need to come back to the fact that this is a holistic, this is a system, and we can't evaluate one part of the system if we don't consider the other part of the system. So yeah, it's a constant conversation between the different stakeholders involved.
Thanks very much for that, Maya. So any thoughts? I heard people talking about, and I want to come back to Claire's point about kind of appealing to like the social issues here and kind of behavioral science, I guess what you call it, in how we overcome the barriers, and people have done qualitative research. I'm wondering if people would want to talk about some of those insights that they've had from doing those studies. A few people mentioned that they've done some qualitative research with researchers about this. Anyone want to kick off? Matthias had to leave, and he was one that specifically mentioned it, but maybe someone else has. Till, go ahead.
Yeah, I've done a very little, very small study recently, and I was looking at clinical trials completed by the 10 largest non-profit sponsors in the UK in 2017, I think, before the parliamentary committee sort of raised the profile of the issue. And I was looking at non-drug trials, And I looked through about 150 trials, found out that about 20% hadn't reported their results, or 30%. I went back to the institutions one by one and said, you know, sorry, you appear to have overlooked something there. And every single one of those 10 institutions said, we are committed to transparency and we are going to follow up on this. So I think that goes back to what Gustav said with he'd like to dig out the results of those older trials. So the next plan is to really scale this up in the UK and systematically go through older trials going back maybe 5 or 10 years and just really sort of clear up the old mess that's there. But here in the UK, we've got an incredible amount of goodwill from institutions, from researchers, from regulators. That might not be the case in all countries, but I think generally if you tell people, look, this trial of yours 6 years ago, you didn't report the result, but here's an easy way to do it. There's a quick way to do it. Please just put the results up on a registry. I think the vast majority of researchers will do that. I think from an institutional level, there's a question at some point, couldn't there be a big funder like Wellcome Trust? He sort of puts out a prize saying, any clinical trial that you haven't made public, that's more than 4 years old, you make the results public now, you get a $4,000 cash grant for your research team. You know, I think that's the sort of incentive that we could be thinking about. And that would be a very, very cost-effective way of adding to the sort of store of medical knowledge, really. But I'd like to know what other people think about that.
Yes, thanks, Phil. Any other thoughts from other people in relation to that? See some nods.
But that's something we've noticed here in the U.S. side is a lot of goodwill, as Till mentioned, but people just lack the knowledge, and that's why I was really excited to work with the report card, being over there with Delwyn and everybody there, because it says, yeah, this is the issue, but this is how you fix it, and I think that's some low-hanging fruit there. People want to do it, they just don't know how to do it. And I think just by a simple thing like that, we could really make some changes.
Yeah, agreed. And I liked the kind of the positive framing of it within that, you know, that there are steps you can take, and here they are. I'm going to come next to Daniel.
Yeah, I think we can follow up, I mean, 2 stakeholder groups and just really asking them at least, would you be willing to do more if we support you in any way that is possible? So yes, we do it with the individual researchers via report cards, but we still have to see how much they are willing, here at least in Germany, to then really use these support tools. Even if we have very easy hands-on support tools saying, such as, look, if you have a paper, but you haven't linked it to the registry, so nobody might find it, at least those not that go to the registry, here's a link that explains you how to link your publication to the registry in less than 5 minutes. But we'll see how many then really do it, even for this very, very low cost time efforts. But so I would say it's another sort of research. It's not necessarily qualitative research where we ask the researchers, what are the reasons? I also think we have identified most of the reasons: lack of time, lack of knowledge. So the next step would be to better investigate what really helps implementing support measures, and where are the limitations that even with very good support measures, people then don't follow up and don't improve their practices. And the second group is the very high-level decision makers. I mean, now in Germany, based on this nice use case in UK, where something at least happened, that the ethics committees together with other parties have to do something that might result into a much broader coverage of studies and then also results publication. We are now contacting, together with several people here in this group, Jörg and Till and Stephanie just joined us here. We are currently inviting the umbrella organizations of the ethics committees in Germany and also the regulators and the German physician associations for telephone calls and interviews, where we suggest to do something similar to that what that is currently starting to happen in Great Britain, and at least ask the very direct questions. What can we do so that maybe together with you, we go into this direction to improve these things? But it's still, I would say, it's really trying to better understand where all the reasons are that they finally don't do it. It would be great to see this in other countries as well.
Thanks, Daniel. We'd love to hear the outcomes of that work that you just outlined. So maybe in a follow-up session sometime. Stephanie, it's great to have you with us. I'd like to give the floor to you. Oh, I can't hear you. Maybe it's just me or... No, sorry. Maybe it's a technical thing. I can come back to you. And maybe I'll hand the floor over to Megan.
Yeah, echoing other people's conversation about the goodwill to increase trial reporting when clinical trial sponsors are aware that they're non-compliant has also been something that we've seen in terms of our university report. And the other thing that I think is really effective is having Freedom of Information Act requests or FOIA requests. Our legal team at SCHC, Columbia Law School, has done a lot of FOIA requests where we've been able to look more into the FDA and NIH's enforcement of clinical trial oversight law. And, we have seen some improvements, but we've seen that there is an automated system when a clinical trial sponsor is non-compliant, and it doesn't indicate within that notification what exactly they've been missing in their reporting. And so there's quite a bit of confusion we've seen about what they need to amend within that system. Many trial sponsors think they can just upload their paper. So like other people were saying, just the quality of the reporting is an issue, in part because of the message that's been generated by clinicaltrials.gov. But there has been more guidelines released about how to become compliant. So yeah, I think FOIA is one great way, and then you can also use that information and to create publicity.
Thanks, Megan. That's really good. And yeah, FOIA is a great tool for advocacy. Stephanie, did we manage to get you back?
I don't know. Can you hear
me?
Yes,
I can hear you. Fantastic.
Oh, wow. I'm always struggling with technique. I hate technique. Till knows that. Any kind of technique. I'm against techniques. No. Yes, I'm a little bit wondering, but I do this actually in all kinds of meetings where we talk about the subject of clinical trial transparency, about the estimation of our colleagues and ourselves too about the willingness and interest of investigators to comply. I personally think that we are overestimating this in a maximum. I think when we ask investigators, they just answer like they answer like we expect them to answer in a social desirable way. Nobody would say, well, I don't care about patients, I don't care about resources, I don't care about ethics. But behind the doors, I mean, why don't they do it? Because they just don't care. I don't think that the question of having a lack of resources is the only one. So I'm always thinking that we are actually overestimating their willingness and their interest in complying to these regulations, because at least I think there are different motivations to run a clinical trial. There can be, of course, like purely scientifically driven motivations, but we all know that there are also other kind of motivations for running clinical trials. That's why I think that we are in general overestimating their interest and their willingness and their compliance. So this is something which I would be interested in when we're talking about qualitative research. I think we're just not estimating this correctly, and that's why for this pessimistic reason, I say that incentivizing would probably not suffice, at least not in the German context. I think we really need de-incentivizing. I think we need funders to blacklist PIs who don't publish for further fundings. I think we need IRBs to disapprove second, third, and fourth trials of trialists who haven't complied to transparency guidelines. I think we need publishers who have to disapprove publishing if they don't have the link to the registry and so forth. I'm sure that we need much more de-incentivizing, and incentivizing just to be compliant will not be enough.
Thank you for challenging us, Stephanie. I think it kind of links with what Claire was saying about appealing to the right motivations that people have kind of on a social level. I think Nick put some references to some research in the chat, so that might be worth looking into. But yeah, going at them with the stick rather than the carrot perhaps might help. Belendra, great to have you with us. I would like to give you the floor now.
I think am I audible?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, so I belong to India, and I just listened the presentation of Dinesh Thakur, and I must appreciate that we should publish the paper if we register in the Clinical Trial Registry of India. As far as my experience is concerned, and my suggestion is that can we create a flag or something in front of Clinical Trial Registry number, or maybe in front of the title, that author has completed the project or not, the clinical trial or not, or they have partially completed, or they have if they have published the paper, something like this. So if anybody just see the title or see the registration number, can simply visualize that whether the project was completed, published or not published, or something like this. This will encourage more and more people to finish the trial and then publish the paper. This is one of the very small suggestions.
Thank you. Does anyone else have experience of those kind of flagging tools, or as a technique? Is that something that's already existing, or in different contexts, or?
I think Till wants me to say that. Yeah, so I mean, on the ISRCTM registry, we have badges for reporting results, any kind of results, adding protocol, adding a statistical analysis plan, and sharing data. And we also have a badge for regular updating while the study is ongoing, but that doesn't show kind of outside. I don't know whether Belendra is thinking about kind of something that's visible externally outside of the registry that kind of demonstrates that, but yeah.
And we've also got someone in the chat saying that Sri Lanka has something, but I'm not sure what. So interesting, something to dig into. But yeah, thank you for your idea, Belendra. Dinesh, would you like to say your question or your thoughts?
Right. No, the only point I was trying to make was one of the unique challenges that we have in India is publication of study results in what are called predatory journals, pay-per-view journals. This is something that I don't think I've seen elsewhere except in India, specifically around studies that are either poorly designed, poorly executed. And I was just curious if anybody's actually dealt with something of this nature, because publication itself doesn't mean anything, if you're basically making up data, which is what our studies show, in the way that the studies are at least registered to the CTRI have been designed or conducted. That was the first point. The second point was thank you, Till, for the shout out to my book. The third thing was I think that one of the things that we really have to think about is that there have been regulatory actions, specifically in Europe, where a large number of generic drugs that were approved by the European Medicines Agency were withdrawn because of issues with clinical studies. Now, this is far beyond transparency, but there's something that we really do need to keep in mind, because specifically around BA/BE studies, which don't register or attract attention as much as IND and India-directed studies do, this is an area that it really needs some attention in the larger scheme of things. So those are the 3 points that I want to make.
Thanks very much, Dinesh. Good points. And if we have time, I'd like to come back to the issue of the kind of the quality of what's in the registry as well. But we do have about 10 minutes left, so bear in mind that if you have questions or things that you want to say before we finish, now's the time to kind of put your hand up and get in the queue. I'm going to come to Dalwin and Maya.
Yeah, thanks. Just a reflection I was having, a lot of us represent different organizations here, and I think we talk about the role of different stakeholders. So I'm just wondering, what is the most useful thing that a given stakeholder can do? So a research institution, for example, probably can, help with incentives. A registry can maybe help, like, make the whole process easy. And it's just an open question to the group. If someone wants to respond to this, I think it might be just helpful to think along those lines to see how we can really just work together, kind of as effectively as possible, given that we all have our limited resources and, a lot of these things take time. And so, yeah, so that's kind of my question to the group of just what can each of us do given our context and the organization that we're based at.
A great pragmatic question from Darwin there. So what do you think is the most important thing that different stakeholders can do? I'm going to hand out the floor to whoever wants to speak first. Balendra.
One of my suggestions is that for the different countries, there may be different rule. But can we create a mentor type of things, like for some institution or some zone geographical areas? Maybe 2 or 4 people as a mentor for the clinical trial, so they can actually guide from the beginning till the end, so that if people do not have some question or they want answer, so these mentor actually help them to do the clinical trial in a better way, and they can encourage publication also. So this is one of the way that by this way we can actually encourage more and more people to publish.
Great, that's a good idea. Some mentorship, sharing of ideas. Claire.
Well, no, I just wanted to say I think that is a good idea. That's a very sort of human response to it, to provide people with an inspiring example, somebody that they want to be like. Yeah. So as long as those people are obviously being as transparent as possible, then that should really work.
Fantastic. Co-signed by Claire there. Florian.
No, just a simple thing for journal. It won't solve the problem, but it might help a little bit. I would like the journals to adopt a registered report format.
Mm-hmm. Big thumbs up from Till. I think nods in the room. So registered reports. Do people know what probably people do know what registered reports are, don't they? Do you want to say a couple of words about specifically what they are? Registered reports, or that's that well known? That's well known.
Yes, so registered report is new form of publication. So new, not so new, but quite new, in which you submit your protocol, and it's peer reviewed based on the importance of the research question and of the quality of the methodology to answer this question, and you receive an acceptance a priori based on that, and then you can start your research, conduct your research. And then when you get the results, the paper will be published, whatever the result is. So this is quite, I think, important.
It might help to appeal to those motivations that people have that are more about their kind of personal academic, we get publication out at the end of it. Till.
Deborah Zarin suggested something a few years ago in a paper, and I'm surprised that more people haven't picked it up. And she said, well, clinical trial results belong onto the clinical trial registry where it was registered. So when people afterwards publish in journals, why can't they just copy and paste essentially the results table from the registry into the journal paper, and all else is just commentary that they have to write? They're just, the results are already there, so just write the commentary. And I think that could save a lot of time as well.
Yeah, good point. We have 5 minutes, so I'm going to maybe start to wrap up, but feel free to kind of come up with any closing thoughts on, what are those things that different stakeholders should prioritize given their expertise and time. Nick, come to you.
Well, I sort of say less focusing on what any given stakeholder can do, and more that I think one thing that we can do for all stakeholders is to make sure that, and this, particularly for people who are talking to loads and loads of stakeholders from all different places, like if Daniel's trying to bring together these people, or Jorg, or someone like Till, you can't let people pass the buck. You can't Because if it's diffused amongst everyone's responsibility, then everyone can say it's someone else's responsibility. It's the editors of the journal's responsibilities, it's the funders' responsibilities, it's the government's responsibilities, it's the individual institution's responsibilities, and then all of those want to point to all the other ones and say they're the ones with the real power here, when truly they all have some modicum of power, like in some handle on the levers of power to make this happen. So you don't say, oh, don't let, when you're having these discussions, don't let people pass the buck. Say, yes, we realize that it would be great if our national legislator passed a law that said it was required to do this. But in the absence of that, what can you do in the meantime? What can this institution do in the meantime? What can the editor of this journal we're talking to do in the meantime and commit to? And like find those areas that people can commit to, rather than, no matter what they are, and people are raising many of the ideas here, rather than let them pass the buck. Don't let them do that.
That's a strong message, and one that I think is very wise. Maya and Delwyn?
Yeah, I just want, on this not passing the buck thing, I also want to say within this group, I think a lot of us have had conversations with each other, but a lot of us have different power and different levers and different roles that we're playing in this. So I think, yeah, it's great to see how we have been able to share things. Gustav and Catherine really taking bits and parts of methods that we've used here in Germany or on COVID work and pulling that aside into another scale, or how can tools that we've developed then be serving registries or other folks in this room? And how can folks who are involved in advocacy, how can Megan use the work that we're doing to fuel your next FOIA request? And I think really asking each other, because at least we know we have enthusiasm and desire, but we also all have limited resources, which we're always facing. So how can we support each other? So yeah, I guess open invitation to reach out if there's anything concretely that I've said today that could support you, because we have limited resources, but we have things to make other things useful to others. So yeah.
Thank you, Maya. I'm going to pass over to Megan, and then I'm going to wrap up given the time.
Thanks, Maya. Yeah, I think in terms of supporting everyone on the call, if there's ever one straight initiative where people can send letters of support or comments, such as the FDA citizen petition we filed, different organizations are welcome to submit comment and support. And I think, UAM is more than happy to support other organizations in this area of clinical trial transparency. And I also agree with the sentiment that we need this multifaceted approach where, you have the resources where you can, talk to universities and also discuss oversight in the government. For example, we've been working with the Energy and Commerce Committee, who oversees the FDA. So if you're able to identify agencies that have power over each other, and to try and reach out to a broad range of stakeholders, then you're able to spread your resources and potentially see if the people in government are able to collaborate. So those are some ideas. And yeah, so just increasing enforcement too. I think it's wonderful to have incentives, but also to have penalties and not have, to have compulsory compliance is something we need to improve. So, yeah.
That's great. Thanks a lot, Megan. So with that, I'm going to wrap up. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining this 90 minutes, which for me, and I'm sure for others, it's absolutely flown by. So thanks very much to the 13 panelists that we had that generously shared their ideas and thoughts. Thanks to Till for kind of getting us all together. And thanks, of course, to Consilium Scientific, who hosted. I've definitely got a lot to take away and think about, but clear messages about coordination, supporting each other, and not letting people pass the buck, and so we can get this solved.